Relax now and feel the softness of the room holding you. There's a hush here, the kind that seems to listen to your breath. Outside, imagine the gentlest wind slipping through old castle gardens, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Inside, there's the slow, reassuring crackle of a fire, its glow brushing the walls like the palm of a friend. Let your shoulders drop a little lower. Let your jaw slacken. You're safe. Your body is welcome to me here on a reed. Breathe in as if you're drawn in the scent of fresh bread. Hold that for a moment. Breathe out, letting go of any tightness, like placing a heavy cloak on a chair after a long walk. Your thoughts are leaves, and you can let them float away with the air. Each breath is a small turning of the page until you find yourself at the first chapter of tonight's story. Our story begins at the edge of a forest where moss clings to stones like time itself. The castle above is old so old. It has learned how to lean into the wind without breaking. Inside those walls lives the king they call the most perverted in medieval history. And yet, in the hush of this evening, you will learn that names can be misleading. His name is By day, he is iron-polished, sharp-edged. By night, when the fire gutter's low, he feeds a hunger no feast can fill. It is not for bodies alone, but for something stranger control. Flattery, the pull of every gaze in the room. He collects attention as other kings collect jewels. But like water cupped in the hands, it always slips away. And then she arrived. One winter evening, when the snow was soft enough to swallow footsteps, the castle gates opened to a traveler. Her cloak was the gray of river pebbles. Beneath it, her eyes caught the light of torches like small reflections in deep water. At her side, a harpet's frame worn by travel, its strings shimmering as though they remembered every song ever played. The guards, who rarely softened, found their voices gentle when they spoke to her. She smiled in a way that made them remember warmth without knowing why. When she was brought before Alderic, the hall was hushed and lit by a low fire. The shadows moved over the banners like breath over skin. "What do you bring to my court?" he asked. "A story," she replied, "and a mirror." But when she lifted the harp, it caught the firelight and shimmered not glass, but something that reflected more than faces. He meant to dismiss her. Yet something in her gaze made him pause. It was not the look he was used to, not adoration, not fear. It was the look of someone who had seen storms before and knew when to simply stand in the rain. She began to play. Notes like warm hands brushed over cold stone. The music filled the spaces between them, not as a performance for the cold, but as if she played for him and for herself in the same breath. Alderic felt his hunger still for the length of a song. Her voice, when she began to tell her tale, was low, smooth, and unafraid to rest in the quiet between words. And somehow that quiet felt like an invitation. The traveler's tale curled through the hall like smoke from a heart slow, spiraling, impossible to rush. She spoke of a king, much like Alderic, one whose crown grew heavier with each demand for admiration. Her words wove warmth and warning together, and Alderic found himself leaning forward, not to correct her, but to catch every syllable. Her eyes dark as wet earth lifted to meet his now and then, as though checking whether the thread she spun still held him. Each glance was brief, but it lingered in his chest the way the glow from embers lingers in the eye after you look away. The court listened too, yet it felt, strangely, like the two of them were alone. Even the fire seemed to lean toward her voice. When she finished, Alderic realized his hand had relaxed around the arm of his chair. He hadn't noticed until then how tightly he usually gripped it. "And what is the point of your tale?" he asked, but his tone lacked the iron it usually carried. Her lips curved, slow and knowing. "Perhaps there is no point, Your Majesty. Perhaps it is enough that you listened." It was the first time in years someone had told him his listening was enough, and it did something to him, something small but unmistakable, like the feeling when a locked door shifts under your hand. Later that night, unable to sleep, Alderic left his chamber and found himself in the small kitchen near the back of the castle. There she was, alone, her harp leaning against the wall, a kettle murmuring over the fire. The scent of herbs drifted through the air, soft, green, a little sweet. "You walk your halls like a ghost," she said without turning. "And you haunt them like one," he replied. She chuckled low, warm, like the sound of a candle-catching wick. "Then perhaps we keep each other company." He stepped closer, the heat of the fire brushing his skin. For a moment they stood in silence, listening to the kettle's gentle bubbling. It was not the charged silence he knew from court, when people swallowed words in fear. This was different, soft, unhurried, as though neither of them owed the other anything but presence. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. Their fingers bruised her. Light contact, accidental in appearance, but it carried the same quiet weight as her glances in the hall. His chest tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. They sat by the fire, their knees angled toward one another without quite touching. The warmth between them was not just from the flames. He found himself watching the way her hair caught the light, each strand moving with the rhythm of her breathing. "Tell me," he said at last, "why you came here." "Because I heard of the most perverted king in the land," she answered, eyes on the fire, "and I wanted to see if the stories were true." "And?" he asked, almost afraid to hear her judgment. She sipped her tea before answering. "Stories can turn, just as people can." Then she looked at him, and the look was not accusation, nor flattery, only steady, like someone willing to wait for the truth to change. That look stayed with him long after she left the kitchen. The scent of herbs and the memory of her fingers against his still resting in the air. The next morning, Alderic found himself waking earlier than usual. The air in his chamber was cool, the light just beginning to slip between the curtains. He, dressed without calling for attendance on old shirt, her cloak, for warmth, and wandered out into the gardens. The traveller was already there. She sat on the low stone wall, plucking her harp in slow, thoughtful notes. The sound mingled with the first bird song of the day, the kind that feels like it's greeting not just the sun, but you personally. She glanced up as he approached, her lips curving in the smallest smile. "You rise early for a king," she said. "And you rise early for a guest," he replied. "I am no guest," she said softly. "I am passing through." But there was something in her done something that made him hope she was lying. He sat beside her on the wall. The stone was cold, but the space between them was warm. His arm brushed her sleeve, and the contact was nothing and everything. His heart seemed to notice it before his mind did. They talked about nothing but the frost still clinging to garden's edges, about the stubborn roses that bloomed soon, about the way the sky looked heavier in winter. Yet every word felt like a thread, and each glance a knot tying them quietly together. Over the next days, Aldaric began to seek her company more often. Sometimes in the kitchens, where she would hum while slicing bread. Sometimes in the library, where she would read aloud without asking whether he wished to hear. Sometimes in the gardens, where silence between them was as comfortable as shared laughter. He noticed where presence changed the air. Rooms seemed warmer, the fire brighter. Even food tasted richer when she was near. He also noticed the way she never demanded his attention, ever tried to collect his gaze, like the courtiers do, and perhaps it was that very freedom she gave him that made him give her more than he had given anyone before. One evening, a storm rolled in, wind pushing hard against the shutters, rain rattling the old glass. The court was restless, but Alderic stayed in his chamber, the fire burning low. There was a soft knock. She stepped inside, her hair damp from the walk, the gray cloak carrying the scent of rain. "The storm is louder than the music tonight," she said. He gestured to the chair near the fire. She sat, her hands resting on the harp's frame, though she did not play. They simply watched the flames together, the rain filling the spaces between their breathing. "After a while," he said, "when you came here, what did you expect to find?" She thought for a moment. "A man who believed the stories about himself. And now?" he asked, almost a whisper. Her eyes met, his steady, unafraid. "Now I see a man learning a different story." His throat felt tight, and not from anger. He realized he wanted her to stay, not because she soothed his hunger for power, but because she quieted it. He wanted to collect her laughter, her silences, her way of looking at him as though he were worth seeing without crowns or titles. The fire cracked, and in that sound, something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but the shape of one forming. When she rose to leave, he stood as well. At the door, she paused, her hand brushing his as she passed the harp strapped over her shoulder. Her fingers lingered, warm against his. And in that moment, the king known as the most perverted in medieval history understood that the greatest turn-in was not in how others saw him, but in how he wished to be seen by one person, and her alone.